Office workers. What's your best office story? Story 1. I work for a car dealership, so it's a little different from the typical office, but most of our days are pretty similar to an office job, so here goes. 1. We had this salesman named Dave, older guy, seemed really nice and everyone liked him, but none of us really trusted him for some reason. One day, he randomly walked up to the manager and said he had to go to a doctor's appointment. He's sorry for the short notice, but mixed up the dates on his calendar. He was a reliable employee, so the boss let him go. 10 minutes later, a state trooper walked in, accompanied by a bounty hunter carrying a full set of shackles. The ones with the handcuffs and leg irons and a chain connecting the two. They asked for Dave. We told him he said he was going to the doctor's, and no, we didn't know where that was. They took off looking for him. Now, when Dave left, he was driving one of the used cars off the lot. We were wondering if we'd ever get the car back. Sure enough, 3 days later, we get a call. They'd found the car abandoned with the keys in the ignition in a mall parking lot 200 miles away, undamaged. We never did hear from Dave again, nor find out why they were after him. Googling his name brings up nothing, so we're assuming he was using a false identity. 2. Sitting at my desk one day, I smelled poop. That wasn't an uncommon occurrence, as many of our salespersons didn't have the best diet and sometimes would crop dust the showroom as they walked through. The poop smell got a bit more intense, and I thought, wow, someone really went to town on the Taco Bell last night. I got up from my desk and walked to the other side of a car parked in the showroom and noticed a trail of brown spots on the floor across the showroom, spaced out the same distance as footsteps. So my thought then was that some farmer had come in. We were close to a pretty country area, and tracked mud all through the building. Also not an uncommon occurrence. It was only then that I put 2 and 2 together. It was not a trail of mud and some nasty farts. It was a trail of poop, all the way across the length of the showroom and down the hall to the bathroom. Turns out some guy in our service waiting room pooped himself and then walked to the bathroom with the poop dropping out of his pant legs every time he took a step. Our manager went into the restroom to see if he was all right, and he said it looked like a chocolate cake exploded. Poop everywhere, all over the floor, on the walls, you name it. Our manager was a good guy and tried to keep things as polite as possible in a situation like this. He pulled the guy's car out of the shop, put plastic on the seats and floor, and parked it right at the door next to the bathrooms. Then quickly ushered the guy out and into his car so he could go home and clean himself up. And that's the first story I've got to read today, or at least one of them. Ugh. It's good of this person, it's good of the manager to put plastic on the car to try and minimize the damage to the car. Ugh. I don't know if any of you have ever had any experiences like that where you've had an unfortunate adult accident like that. I'm trying to remember. Even if I remembered an incident like that, I'm not telling you guys. Sorry. Nope. Story 2. I worked with a complete train wreck. She had no social skills and was incredibly needy. The office was an hour from her trailer, but she didn't want to move closer because the city was too ethnic. She invited strange men she met online to meet her at her home and would occasionally let them sleep over and spend the day with her 11-year-old daughter the next day if school was out. Daughter was eventually removed when one of the internet boyfriends impregnated her. Coworker went to court to fight for custody reinstatement because she couldn't pay her bills without the child support. Ended up in jail for contempt after the judge said no. some of her office greatest hits, thought it was appropriate to announce to any coworkers, regardless of age or seniority, that she never wore underwear. Frequently wore stretched thin white leggings which let everyone know without a shadow of a doubt that she wasn't kidding. Would aggressively harass the owner of the company, who was only on site a few times a year for official visits for free company swag. He had the good grace not to humiliate her, but everyone else wanted to crawl into a hole. Outed a gay contractor to the entire building, including gossiping about all the intimate details of their planned adoption. People didn't know she wasn't supposed to be sharing the info and bought baby gifts. The adoption fell through after the baby was born, and the contractor had to deal with returning them and finding out he'd been outed in the process. She didn't see how she'd done anything wrong. Developed an obsession over an employee who lost some company property when he fell asleep at a girl's house. Instead of working, she appointed herself to track down the alleged thief online by illegally accessing databases we were only allowed to use for specific work reasons. Employee was fired for multiple reasons, including all the women who kept calling his company's cell looking for a booty call, and she continued to defend him and his innocence. Told black jokes to a summer intern and didn't see why she'd done anything wrong or why the intern quit. One day she came into work with a huge hickey on her neck and didn't know until her supervisor asked her to cover it up. She called her lay of the week from her desk phone and yelled at him loudly, insisting this never would have happened if he'd kept his teeth in. Oh, that is worth a read right there. Ugh. Usually it is stories about men being inappropriate in the workplace. This woman, there's several ways to describe this woman. She's a busybody. She has no filter. She is just unemotional to anybody else. She's just a Karen, but just doesn't care about anyone else. Well, that's what a Karen is, but just doesn't care about the consequences. Only when things happen to her. Anyway, story 3. I have one. We have an agent. Let's call him Joe. Joe is about 60 and the perfect employee. Never misses work, perfect stats, honest, customers love him and always give him praise. Volunteers for overtime, and absolutely everybody loves him. I use his calls as examples in my training class. He has been offered numerous management positions, but is perfectly content sitting at home, fixing customers' problems, making them happy, and making our company money. He is an absolute machine. 2 years ago, his wife and his 40th wedding anniversary was coming up, and I had a business trip to Ohio for a new system training. Joe was told he had to come with me to learn. He pleaded he couldn't because he would miss his wedding anniversary. Plus, it was odd because agents never go on trips. And my manager said sternly, "Do it, Joe. You don't have a choice." Joe, of course, went home and packed and got ready to leave a few days later. His wife said she was going to stay with her sisters while he was gone and left the night before. Our company car picked me up for the airport, and we headed to Joe's. He was pretty upset and depressed, but trying to be upbeat. We went to dinner and stalled for a few hours, for good reason, and when we got to the airport, we boarded our plane and headed to Houston for a switch. We got to Houston, and we walked up to the Miami gate, and I said, "There's your plane." He looked at me, and I pointed over to his wife, standing at the gate. My boss had arranged to send them to Miami for a week, and then on a cruise to Jamaica for their anniversary with my boss's company credit card for expenses. The first thing out of his mouth was, "Oh my gosh, I didn't pack for that. But of course, we had his wife take care of that when we sent her out for an earlier flight. He started crying right there in the airport and hugged me. I handed him the credit card, went over and gave his wife a hug and told her she owed me some apple cookies. So bomb. And headed to my plane for Ohio. Went to Ohio and, yeah, Ohio. That's so awesome. Admire your boss for 2 reasons. 1, obviously sending a deserving guy out on the trip, but 2, his commitment to trolling was awesome. Sending him out on a connecting flight first is just A+ stuff. I'd work for this man gladly. Well, I'm glad this employee was recognized for this. With all the stories we hear these days about bosses not caring about employees or their jobs, it's glad to see a story like this and just to see someone that is living up to something that deserves such a spectacular trip. I can't think of any company now that would ever do anything like this for one of their employees, even if they were as exceptional as Joe is. Story 4. Posted this before, but works here too. My first day, I was warned about who I would be sitting beside. She arrives in the next day and starts telling me about the terrible day she had yesterday. Wee fella wasn't well, so had to take him to the hospital. I thought, oh, that's terrible. Hope he's okay. Want to see a photo of him? She proceeds to show me a photo of a lizard in a Santa costume. Another day, she is complaining she can't find one of her favorite shoes. Later on, she remembers where she put it. The trip switch in her fuse box kept tripping, so she took the shoe and used it to jam the switch on so she could use the kettle and forgot about it. Recently, she checked her bank account online and started swearing, saying she was going to unalive her daughter as she was just billed £274 from O2. She goes to O2 at lunchtime to see how the daughter could manage this large a phone bill. It wasn't the daughter's phone. It was hers. Turns out she doesn't know how to hang up her phone and had left different people hours and hours of voicemail messages going 13 hours over her free minutes. She spends her lunchtime on council websites reading through the burial records and seeing when different people were buried. She already asked most of the other staff where their relatives are buried so she can look it up. If she isn't looking up morbid details on her lunch, she's normally at a local fancy shop, walking around trying all the free tasters instead of buying a lunch. On one occasion, her daughter left her Facebook logged in on her phone. Crazy lady proceeded to read through her entire Facebook message log and read them out. Turns out her 15-year-old daughter is partial to a wee sniff of 80s yuppie powder or a wee smoke of weed. She really is a head case who gets away with doing little to nothing at work. She has no idea how to use her computer, and when people show her, she goes, "Oh no, you do it and I'll watch," and learns nothing. She has such a simple job which takes me a few hours to do, but it takes her all day. The manager lost the head and ignores her now. Story 5. Oh boy, I have a good one. I was an intern at the time. Summer of 2013. I'm interning at a pharmaceutical biotech company and was meeting the team. There was this particular guy, white guy mid-40s, on the team who I had lunch with on a daily basis. We talked about what I was studying in school at the time and how I wanted to travel the world for a bit after graduation instead of just going straight to 9-to-5 office life. He got deeply depressed when I said so and started saying he's been doing the 9-to-5 thing for 20 years straight. He's like 45. And what I said to him really made him wake up. In my head, I'm like, oh, this isn't going to be good. Fast forward 2 days later, I'm finishing up training modules assigned to me, and all of a sudden, one of the HR ladies walks over to my manager's cube and explains that he quit. No 2 weeks' notice. And my manager bolts up and yells in disbelief, "He what? Please repeat what you just said. He went to Taiwan to find himself?" I'm trying to connect the dots to see if I, the lowly intern, really said some things to stir up an employee to quit his job and travel the world. I didn't tell my manager the conversation I had with him. But I did tell one of the girls that I worked with, and that's when I started my journey of an office fling, but that's a story for another day. Too long didn't read? I had a casual conversation as an intern with an employee about my aspirations to travel the world after I graduate. Probably made employee quit, don't know if consequences or not, but I think that conversation stirred his actions. I think you did a good thing for that guy. Story 6. While I was working for State Farm in Florida, I was in an office with 4 women and 1 other guy. One serendipitous day, all of the ladies were all scheduled to be out of the office for various reasons, and me and the other guy were left alone. We invented Man Day that day. There were no appointments on the books for that day. Everyone had scheduled light, knowing it was just he and I alone. We went to the gas station across the street and got a 6-pack of craft beer, put on some Netflix, and watched guy movies on his laptop for a few hours. After that, we found a giant stash of old fluorescent lights that didn't work anymore in an old storage closet. We went into the back lot and had lightsaber wars until they were all gone. We smoked a doobie and did cookies in the dirt lot out back in my old Toyota pickup truck. Toward the end of the day, we ordered Chinese delivery and had the driver bring us a 6-pack. We used to order delivery Chinese at least 2 times a week. They knew us. When the delivery guy got there, we gave him a big tip and a beer, and the other guy and I drank beer and closed up with Chinese. Maybe not the craziest story in this thread, but it was easily the best day I've ever had in the office. The other guy and I email once in a while now. We always fondly remember Man Day when we do. Did cookies in the dirt lot out back in my old Toyota pickup truck? I think you mean donuts, not cookies. I can't even figure out how someone would do a maneuver in a car that would resemble a cookie. If I'm wrong, please enlighten me. For all the little special events that management tries to come up with and themed days to try and appease employees, this one just seemed to work the best because it was the employee's idea and everything just came naturally. I think I might have had a few days like that in an office where I've worked. Not with another person, just me just deciding to kick back. I think there were quite a few of those, so let's move on. Story 7. We call her the Runner. Call center rep was going to be fired for refunding fees that had never been charged. She was essentially just giving away money because she couldn't figure anything out. About halfway to the conference room, she figures out what's happening. As such, she comes to a dead stop and refuses to keep going. She keeps asking her manager, "Johnny, are you going to fire me?" Of course, he can't confirm since she's still in the middle of the floor, so he tells her he just wants to be able to have a conversation in private. She keeps asking, and he keeps not answering. Eventually, she just turns around and takes off for her desk. Johnny is standing there for about 10 seconds trying to decide between going after her or continuing to the conference room where his boss is waiting for them. He finally decides on the conference room. Johnny is a pretty large guy, and his boss is a chain smoker. After the boss knows what happened, they take off running over to her desk, and the other reps tell them that she left. So they then sprint down to the parking lot. Just as they got to the doors, they see her car pulling onto the street. They hung out for about 5 minutes to catch their breath. When they got back, Johnny called corporate HQ, and they let him know that the rep had already called Aetna to file for a leave of absence. She got fired anyway. Story 8. My coworker was out of town for an office pancake breakfast. In her absence, we decided to make her up a breakfast plate. We ended up making a Vitruvian man made of sausages on a royal china plate and hiding it in her office. She found it, and then the Vitruvian man began to travel office to office. It was sealed with tape, but that didn't stop it from starting to go moldy. The Vitruvian man was hidden in desk drawers, under paper piles, behind coats. I knew it was my turn for the Vitruvian man to end up in my office, but when I got in, I couldn't find it anywhere. Later in the day, one of our VPs came in to meet with me about a serious matter. He asks me a question, and in thinking of my response, I look up. There on the ceiling, Mission Impossible style, is a moldy man made of sausage with its taped-on smiley face looking down at me. I awkwardly carried on the conversation with the VP through random laughter, which didn't make sense to him. I had to throw out the plate after that. In total, we had it moving around the office for about a month. I've never waffled between finding a story disgusting and hilarious in so few lines before, but I'm going to give it a final grade of hilarious. Story 9. During Occupy Wall Street protests, a Wells Fargo representative set up a little table with cookies and coffee in order to get people at the call center to sign up for an account. Well, it turns out that the IT guy in charge of all the servers was a huge supporter of the protest. We used an instant messaging system there called Spark, and every one of the employees got a broadcast message from him saying something along the lines of, "As you know, Wells Fargo is in the building today offering accounts. Before you sign up for an account, you should know that Wells Fargo has been responsible for funding substance cartels and military interests leading to hundreds of lives lost. Consider a credit union before signing." This is not a direct quote, but you get the gist. A little while later, all the inbound calls stopped, followed by someone screaming, "He shouldn't be here! This isn't right!" A phone then flew clear across the call center. It's a pretty massive call center. Everyone immediately prairie-dogged from their cubicle to see what happened. It was the first time the call center was completely silent. Turns out the site director, top guy, was trying to get IT guy to leave. Then they started to wrestle over a tablet. The police called, but he wasn't arrested. I really half thought that mass message was going to get everybody to do some sort of prank on the Wells Fargo rep. I'm not sure why I was expecting it to come out as differently as that. Sometimes you just can't let your feelings get in the way of work. Too bad. Story 10. A little over a year ago, we had a lockdown after some guy assaulted a cop and barricaded himself in a trailer across the street from my office. We spent the afternoon watching out the window as the SWAT team showed up and started setting off flashbangs. One of my coworkers pointed out there was a guy with a sniper rifle trained at the trailer, which just happened to be directly between him and my office window. By far the most exciting workday I've had. After a couple of hours, we heard a knock on the front door, and thinking it might be the police, the receptionist answered it. Nope. It was Bob, who's the head of manufacturing in our warehouse across the street. Like literally 2 buildings from where the guy was holed up. He was in high spirits, just wanted to see what we were up to. We asked him if the police let him over because at this point, they had blocked off the whole road between us and the action. He just shrugged and said, "I didn't ask them." After hanging out a bit, he nonchalantly walked out the door and across the street again. They eventually got the guy and nobody was seriously hurt. Story 11. We've had a couple of good prank wars over the years. Best thing that comes to mind quickly is when we changed a guy's phone autocorrect to replace periods with question marks. He was very confused for days. Another story. I tied all the cables of a guy's computer together under his desk with a zap strap, monitors, mouse, keyboard, phone, etc. I then hooked that bundle of cables to the lever under his chair that controlled the up-down position and turned the chair so that it was at a 90-degree angle. He came back to his desk after lunch and sat down, grabbed a hold of the desk like he normally does to turn in his chair, and spun to face his computer. His entire desk was pulled into the rear corner of his cubicle. It made a lot of noise, but not as much as he did swearing. I changed a guy's autocorrect to change the to the fricking. He couldn't type, so he was always looking down at his keys and depending on word to catch any mistakes. Needless to say, he turned in documentation like, "I called the frickin' customer and they told me that the frickin' software was not functioning correctly." Story 12. I work in a small company, 20 or so people. One day I realized that I was the most senior person who was in work that day, which meant, for the first time, I was the boss. I dispatched one of the junior team members to go and fetch cakes. She fetched cakes for everyone. The power. At lunchtime, I decreed that we were all going to the pub, and the beers were on me, or rather, my company Amex card. I honestly honestly intended to spend about 90 minutes at the pub and then come back to the office for the afternoon. However, we stayed in the pub until it kicked us out at midnight. Our company has a simple rule on drinking on school nights. You turn up to work the next day or there's trouble. So even though everyone was super hungover, they all dragged themselves into the office. While I was getting my butt kicked by the MD, so many people were throwing up at once that they had to use the toilets on the other floors of the building. It was a freaking good night out, though. I don't think you're a management material, but I could be wrong. Depends on what kind of company this is. Maybe they work in the production of beer and they have to keep up with the trends. That's why they were at the bar for research. You don't know. Story 13. While I was working as an intern for my current company, myself and another intern decided to play a prank on a coworker who went on vacation for a week. We decided to hide both of his monitors someplace in our office and created a scavenger hunt he needed to complete in order to find them. It took about 2 hours to come up with about 10 rhyming riddles that took him to the next clue in the office. Since this guy would always be at the office about an hour before anyone else, we decided to set up a webcam to watch his reaction when he finally got back. The plan worked perfectly, except for the fact that he had to come back from vacation a day early because some program he wrote wasn't working and he was the only person who was able to fix it. To say he was mad when he got to the office to find he had no monitors was an understatement. Throughout the whole webcam, you could hear him walking from clue to clue, just yelling and swearing. Needless to say, we took a break from pranking for a little while after that. Story 14. I got this job a few years back. In the first week, I was blown away by the technical ineptitude of the whole dang place. Our job requires a lot of scanning, usually large stacks of bank statements, 100 to 200 pages at a time. And the people who I worked with and for, more often than not, needed to scan things that were front and back. How they did this blows my mind to this day. Step 1. Flip the whole stack upside down so the reverse side was ready to scan. Step 2. Make a copy of every back side. Step 3. Take the reverse side and place it behind the front side so that it would be page 1, copy of page 2, page 3, copy of page 4, etc. Step 4. Scan the whole stack face up. The amount of paper they wasted was unbelievable. That's the day I became a genius by showing them our enterprise-level scanner could scan front to back simultaneously with the push of a button. This is also why I became partly responsible for every IT issue in the office, despite having IT members on staff at all times.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 15. Our office was centrally controlled by a head office in another city. There was a massive transformer explosion knocking out all the systems and controls in the head office. Essentially, no work could get done, no customers could get to us. We couldn't even cool the building down. Mid-August was plus 35 Celsius outside. So we had to send everyone home for about 3 days, and only essential staff stayed. I was in HR, so I was one of them. Slowly started to build up staff as we were getting closer to operation. Ended up working about 110 hours, including sleeping there. Working, however, was a very loose term. Since no PCs could run or anything, we sat and watched TV, played board games and poker, played a ping pong tournament. In our break room, we had NES, SNES, and Sega. We ended up playing a big Super Spike volleyball tournament, an NES ice hockey tournament, which I won, and an Excitebike tournament. One of the guys who had to stay on through the night played through Zelda. Only essential staff stayed. I was in HR, so I was one of them. Only HR people would consider themselves essential staff. Don't know if I've been in a job that had a SNES or an NES, but I did work a job once that had a big ping pong tournament company-wide. I was paired up with someone very high up in the company, and it was all I could do to just keep up with him, because he had this wicked serve that would just win every time. Story 16. Not an office, but a couple of years back, my dad and some other guys played a joke on a guy at the plant we work at. They started adding gas to this guy's new truck every day to make it look like he was getting great gas mileage. The guy was bragging and like, "Yeah, man, my gas mileage is like 80 miles per gallon and I have no idea how." They took it further and added like a random piece of metal to this guy's engine with a label that said experimental gas saver or something on it. They looked under the hood and were like, "Whoa, man, you got one of those? That's so cool." Then, after about 3 to 6 months, they start siphoning gas out to make his mileage drop. Guy freaked out because his gas mileage was like 5 miles per gallon, so he took it to the dealership and raised heck saying, "I want this experimental gas saver taken off right now." Poor salesman had to try to tell him somebody was pulling his leg at work. Apparently, the guy was so ticked he wouldn't talk to anyone at work for a couple of months. Story 17. This was at my last job, a call center, on National Donut Day at Krispy Kreme. Girl A had gotten a box of donuts and was on a call with a customer. Girl B comes up and takes one out of the box. Girl A mutes her phone and says, "Shrew, you better be joking. Don't touch my donuts." Girl B turns around and walks away with the donut. Girl A hangs up on her customer and full-on assaults Girl B. An epic brawl breaks out right in the middle of the call floor, and they even crash through the giant partition that separates our call center from another company's, which is actually all in the same giant room. At some point, a knife tumbles out of one of their purses. No one actually pulled it or tried to use it, but it did fall out. Management has everyone end their calls and clears the floor out. Cops are called, and both girls are escorted out, never to be seen there again. Because donuts. Girl B is a shrew. Story 18. I think it was the day my butthole/idiot boss, the president of the company, who only made decisions to further his career or reputation, was fired by the board of directors for incompetence. The mood in the office was jubilant and reminded me of the scene in Wizard of Oz when the Munchkins were dancing around because the Wicked Witch was crushed by a house. I remember spending 5 hours in a conference room participating in the undoing of all his absolutely nonsensical policies. The extent of his buttholery was legendary. He would hold meetings at 5:30 p.m. just to get his money's worth from the leadership. He was the sort of person who would arrive late to meetings, not giving a single care that it created scheduling conflicts for other people. He went through a dozen admins. He made all social events tense and awkward, then would get massively butthurt if people were enjoying themselves. I hear he's retired at 52, but let's be honest, he's not retired, he's unhirable. There's a difference. Story 19. I swear to God this is true. I worked in a staffing company as a recruiter. One of the sales guys always bragged about his martial arts skills. One afternoon, one of the female recruiters calls hogwash on him. They were right outside my cubicle. He says something to the effect of, "Don't believe me? I'll kick my foot over your head right now. Start here, just like this." He positions her and then gets in a karate squat, don't know how else to describe it, and goes for it without any stretching, practice, or anything. He rotates and kicks his foot way up, just high enough to make solid contact with her right temple with a solid thud. She staggers a bit dazed and he runs and hides in his cube. I couldn't believe what I just saw. It happened so quick. It was insane. Plot twist. He really is a master martial artist. He just hated that she doubted him. Story 20. At my old job, we had a tradition of pranks on people who took vacations. Nothing major. One guy, we gave him a program that anybody in the office could remotely open or close a CD drive. One guy, we replaced his monitor with literally a 7-inch monitor. It worked perfectly. Little things like that. This one guy was already a little bit on the paranoid side, so the prank on him was absolutely nothing. He spent his first week back going through all of the software on his PC looking for what we did. He spent the second week back going through his desk drawers, the chair, the desk looking for what we did. Once we realized it was still going on, we would see him start to giggle and say things like, "Oh man, When you find it, it's gonna be great. It was over a month before we finally let him in on the joke. Story 21. We used to have 2 office dogs. 2 fat, dopey golden retrievers. They were kept in a dog yard with a huge kennel right outside the office back door. But sometimes the dogs got into the office and ran amok excitedly through the entire office. For some reason, though the dogs were clinging on walks, they wouldn't venture too far away from us, even off the leash. The sight of so many awesome new friends in a small space made them forget all the rules, and they would sprint away from any attempts to catch them inside the office. It was always catastrophic. Some of my colleagues are terrified of dogs, and they would run screaming from their desks. The Goldie's tail swept anything dog level off to the floor. A few times they got excited, they peed and pooped on the carpeted floor, and caused the office to stink to high heaven. Story 22. 2 middle-aged women, late 40-ish, gray hair, mom jeans, got into a fist fight at the office. I don't remember the context of the fight, but Deb went into Stephanie's office, not their real names, and closed the door. There was a little bit of shouting and then a thud. The door flies open just in time for me to see Stephanie throwing a punch. They yell at each other in the lobby, and then one of them actually says, "Let's take this outside." So they do. Some of the younger guys in the office went after them and had to break them up in the parking lot. Only one of them got fired, and they offered me her job a few days later. I hope they kept the winner. Story 23. So I did the old screenshot the desktop, hide desktop icons, and save the screenshot as the new desktop background to 3 different computers, 2 of which were shared between 5 to 10 people. Now, the problem was I called in sick with food poisoning the next day. Utter chaos broke out. No one could open any programs. IT had to get involved, and it apparently took them a few hours to figure out what had happened. No one ever knew it was me, and I had planned on, taking credit and winning that stage of the prank war, but no. I played dumb and bit my tongue. That's hilarious, but what's even more funny is that nobody knew how to open a program without a desktop icon. Story 24. A guy at my office had a fishing rod along the ceiling. He had the hook positioned over a guy, who we'll call Dave's head. Every so often, he dropped the hook, which has a little weight, onto Dave's head, and then quickly pulled the cord so the hook is back up to the ceiling and isn't visible. This was going on months, and the guy who was being pranked didn't have a clue. He went to the doctor for tests because it felt like a throb to his head, so he wondered if something was really wrong. When we told him what was happening, he couldn't stop laughing at himself. Dave's revenge was pretty sweet. He had intimacy with the prankster's sister. Dave, my man. Story 25. The general manager of my old company decided to fire her assistant. Our director of finance cut the severance checks and sent them out to the GM for signature. Somehow, they got delivered to the wrong person and ended up at the assistant's desk. He walks down to finance director, jokingly asking, "What is this? Am I getting fired or something?" Cringe. At my current job, a girl found a dead roach animal under her desk. We contacted the office manager, who put down traps. Over the weekend, a crazy animal rights activist type coworker came in and threw out all the traps, then sent out an email about how the roaches had feelings and rights too. Story 25. There are many phantom pooper stories out there where someone drops a deuce in the bathroom floor or shower, but at one of my Navy commands, we actually had someone take a poop in a coffee pot and then run the coffee machine, fill up the pot, and leave it there for people. Luckily, someone smelled it before they tried to drink it. They never caught the guy. We had a guy poop in a paper bag and then microwave it for 10 minutes. Ultimately, he was easily found as he not only threatened to do it when he was issued a final warning for his poor performance, but he also bragged about it. Story 27. I worked with a guy we called Irish Jeff. We were on a sales team, and he will call customers and start singing "Oh, Danny Boy" while the phone rings. When the customer answers and asks if he was singing, he will say, "Well, I am Irish." He will then talk to them for 45 minutes about his Irish heritage and the names of the boats that originally brought people over from Ireland without letting them off the phone. He doesn't really ever talk about anything he's supposed to be selling. He was born and raised in Texas. We call them plastic patties in Ireland. They annoy us as much as they annoy you. Story 28. A guy in my office brought a crock pot into work to make stew in the cubicle next to his. No one really thought twice about it because this guy was just generally weird in an office consisting of 50% weirdos. He put the ingredients in when he arrived, then went about his business. Hours later, just before lunch, he opens it up. Slowly but surely, a wave of coughing and watery eyes spreads across the office. Turns out his stew was all kinds of hot sauces and peppers heated up in a crock pot with a piece of chicken. He pretty much low-level pepper sprayed all of his coworkers. Story 29. I'm a home brewer. One day I made a really tasty batch based on the White House honey ale recipe and gave a few bottles out to some coworkers of mine. This one particular coworker liked the custom label I made so much, it was the Obama beer-drinking thumbs-up picture with a funny quote, that he decided to keep it on his desk instead of drink it. 3 months later, boom! It explodes. Beer and glass shards everywhere. All over his monitor, chair, desk, cube walls. There was even glass stuck in the ceiling. Good thing he wasn't at his desk when it happened. I don't give out beer anymore. Story 30. 10 minutes into the company meeting, someone's phone went off playing bagpipe music. But as it got louder, we realized that it was an actual set of bagpipes playing outside. Before we knew it, the guy marches into the conference room blasting away that one Scottish song. Don't know what it's called, but you know the one I mean. After he finished playing, the spectator, who had been playing dumb until now, announced that we had just acquired a small company in Scotland. Best announcement ever. Story 31. So I had this coworker who got a hold of the office's emergency air horn. She would sneak up behind people and blast it right in their ear. She got me really good with it once. I almost had a heart attack. She was really good at being sneaky with it, too. You'd be working away, have no idea she'd be, like, right under your freaking desk, and then the deity slammed air horn. This makes my ears bleed. Story 32. We had a Phil Collins day to frick with a coworker that professed to hating Genesis. Months after revealing their hatred, the president of the company had the IT department stay after everyone left to absolutely cover this person's desk in Phil's face. And I Heart Phil sings in celebration of Phil Collins' birthday. It was practically a holiday, and very little work was accomplished as a result. Pretty much the best day at the office ever. Story 33. A young girl I worked with, married, was smashing the boss, also married. They stayed after hours for weeks to do their thing in his office. For some reason, she opened up to me about this even though we weren't friends, and she included the fact that he prematurely ejaculates. So anytime he's being a dong, I just picture that and feel better. Well, if he's being a dong, I'd probably get out of the way to avoid any sticky situations. Story 34. You know those compressed air canisters you get for cleaning keyboards? We had a few of those lying around the office. One day, the office clown thought it'd be a genius idea to take a lighter to one. Not entirely sure what went through his head when he sprayed it through a lighter in a bay full of desks and colleagues. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. He, however, was suspended on the spot and ultimately sacked. Story 35. I work at a factory back office watching over the incoming-outgoing materials and general material management. We had a shipping container come in from the States, transporting several big bags of a sugar/milk powder mixture. We crack open the container and, much to our surprise, we find a cat. Bear in mind, this container spent a solid week or two at sea. The cat was alive. Apparently, it survived of eating the powder. Story 36. The day the interns were supposed to start, I had a friend help me hide one of the interns' computers. We replaced it with an old electric typewriter we'd found in the closet, and then we placed an op-ed on top with random words and phrases circled in red. The intern was so confused and distraught when they saw it, and we told them that this was not their workstation for summer. Story 37. It's almost impossible to get fired around here. Found a dude passed out from a H substance OD in the bathroom. He was back at work the next week. We did have one executive get fired after he signed a software contract, and then it was revealed he was sleeping with the sales rep. She got fired too. Now they run a B&B somewhere. What mild-mannered villains you have. Story 38. I had a guy who works for me put a random sound generator in my boss's office. Whenever things are getting tense, I get it turned on for a few hours. Sometimes when I'm away on vacation. Sometimes I switch it on when the installer is away. It's been going on for about 11 months now. I like the children giggling noise best. Good times. Story 39. My current office building was once a funeral home that had sat vacant for a number of years after the previous owner shot himself in the apartment upstairs. When we first moved into the office, there was a wall panel that was accidentally knocked out in the basement. There were about 30 people worth of ashes hidden in the walls. Free coffee. Story 40. One day, some workers outside accidentally hit an underground power line. We all got to go home early. Yay! This happens all the time where I work. We have battery backups and just keep working. You think public utilities are incompetent, but they're master craftsmen next to the military. Story 41. You know those protein shakers? If left unclean for some time, it stinks like 15-year-old farts and rotten eggs if you open it up inside an office landscape. Our cleaning lady didn't know that, and we had to evacuate 2 floors in the building. Story 42. One day, the ceiling in the engineering office caved in. It's a manufacturing plant, though, so instead of sending us home, they told us to put on our hard hats, dust off computers, and keep working.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.